What if I told you that a liar rarely gets caught because of the lie itself, but because of the questions they are asked? Most people assume you have to watch their eyes, study their gestures, or listen for a nervous shift in their voice. But the best manipulators already know how to control all of that. What they struggle to control, however, is the underlying structure of their story. Today, you are going to discover 3 specific questions that make deception incredibly difficult to maintain. We'll get to the third question shortly. It's one that almost no one thinks to ask, yet it often reveals the most hidden inconsistencies. But first, we need to look at why a fabricated story eventually falls apart. Think about how the brain works when you tell the truth. You don't have to invent anything. You just retrieve a memory. Lying, on the other hand, requires building a parallel reality from scratch. Every detail has to align, and every reaction has to seem natural. The longer a lie continues, the more mental energy it takes to keep that structure from collapsing. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche understood this deeply. He observed that people often lie, not because they are inherently malicious, but because they are desperately trying to preserve a specific version of themselves. We all wear masks depending on the situation to navigate life. But keeping that mask perfectly in place is exhausting. Eventually, a contradiction slips out. And a well-timed question is exactly how you bring that contradiction to the surface. This brings us to the first question. It sounds completely ordinary. Can you tell me exactly what happened from beginning to end? On the surface, it's a basic request, but psychologically, it's highly effective. An honest person remembers events as a fluid experience, often jumping around to the most emotionally significant moments. A person inventing a story, however, has to mentally walk through a script, and scripts are fragile. If you just let them talk, something interesting happens. You'll notice they start over-explaining completely irrelevant details, while the most crucial moments are brushed over with vague phrasing. Their brain is actively trying to balance saying too much and saying too little. And that calculation is exactly where the cracks begin to form. But what if you are dealing with someone who has practiced their timeline until it's flawless? This is where you have to shift the conversation from facts to psychology. Question number 2. Why did you make that decision in that moment? Notice the subtle shift. You are no longer asking what happened. You are asking for the internal logic behind it. A liar will obsessively prepare the sequence of events, but they almost never prepare their emotional motivations. When you ask them to explain their why, their brain has to improvise. And forced improvisation tends to create hesitant, overly complex justifications. Honest people usually explain their choices simply, sometimes even admitting they made a mistake. Someone holding onto a lie will often bury you in rationalizations just to sound believable. This behavior points to a deeper truth that Nietzsche recognized about human nature. He believed that our greatest illusions are often the ones we create about ourselves. We all want to be seen as competent, ethical, or brave. We've all justified a poor decision or told ourselves a story we desperately wanted to believe. The tragedy of a lie is that the harder someone fights to protect this idealized self-image, the further they drift from reality. The lie stops being a simple defense mechanism and becomes a mental prison. They are stuck defending a person who doesn't actually exist. Now, we are approaching the final question. But before we get there, we have to address a mistake that almost guarantees you won't get the truth. Most of us, when we feel we are being lied to, want to confront the person immediately. We want to point out the flaw. But the moment you attack someone directly, their brain enters a primal defense mode. Even an entirely innocent person can become flustered and appear guilty under an accusation. The most effective investigators don't accuse. They observe. They stay calm, they listen, and they let the silence do the heavy lifting. Silence is often far more revealing than a forced confession. When people feel the weight of an awkward pause, they tend to keep talking. And the more they talk, the more they reveal. Which leads us to the third question. It doesn't rely on aggression or clever tricks. It simply asks, is there anything you haven't told me yet? This question is disarming because it shifts the burden completely onto them. An honest person usually answers quickly. They either have more to add or they don't. But for someone hiding the truth, this question creates profound discomfort. It forces them to wonder, what do they already know? Did I miss something? They stop answering the question naturally and start calculating their risk. This subtle shift from simple recall to active risk assessment is often the most reliable indicator that something is being concealed. This is the core insight to take away. Despite what body language myths tell us, the true marker of honesty isn't a lack of fidgeting or perfect eye contact. It's consistency. Does the story evolve naturally? Do the underlying motives make sense? The more you look for structural consistency over physical tells, the less likely you are to misjudge the people around you. Nietzsche reminded us that humans naturally gravitate toward comfortable illusions over inconvenient truths. And before we judge others, we have to admit that we are all guilty of this to some degree. We rewrite our own histories to protect our egos. Recognizing a lie in someone else often starts with understanding how easily we can lie to ourselves. So the next time something doesn't add up, don't play the interrogator. Just ask these 3 questions. Listen closely. And remember, a sequence of events can be fabricated, but maintaining the illusion of a perfectly coherent reality is a burden very few can carry for long.